Welcome to the fourth installment of our JEP series, Ethical Podcasts for Our Time. Today we're very honoured to host Rav Yuval Cherlow. Rav Cherlow, hello. Rav Yuval is Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Orot Shaul in Tel Aviv and is a graduate of Yeshivat Rav Cherlow received his smicha from the Israeli Chief Rabbinate and served as a major in the IDF. He's also a founding member of Tzohar, a rabbinical organization known for its commitment to bridging the gap between religious and secular Israelis, and he heads the ethics center of Tzohar. Rav Cherlow was one of the pioneers of the digital response movement and has since published an extraordinary 75,000 teshuvot, or responsa, making his halachic guidance accessible to Jews around the world. Rav Yuval is a member of a number of high-level government ethics committees, including the Committee for Genetic Treatment Approval, the Advisory Committee of the Israel National Transplant Center, and the Surrogacy Committee, as well as others. He specializes in ethical issues around dementia, end-of-life and palliative care. A prolific scholar and writer, Rav Cherlow has authored numerous books and articles spanning Halacha, Tanakh, modern Jewish philosophy, and other pressing ethical questions of our time. So, Rav Cherlow, thank you so much for taking the time and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Shalom, and thank you for having me.
So let's start then with a framing question for our discussion. Please, your views. Should halacha be guided by an overarching ethic, or is it by its very nature ethical?
In general, ethics can be formulated in different versions. For instance, in the Ten Commandments, lo tignov, don't steal, it's a halacha, but it's an ethical halacha. So we begin the discussion that many of our commitments, many of our mitzvot are ethical. And last week we wrote a bunch of them, and this week and next week it's part of our halachic world. But ethics is not only legislations or laws or commitments, it's also principles. For instance, the most famous demand is מה ששנוא עליך אל תעשה לחברך. What do you hate that people will do towards you? Don't do it to someone else. And Hillel HaZaken said it's the pillar. It's really the first thing of the Torah. So when we deal with all kinds of ethics, ideas and ideology and notions and whatever, I am positive sure that it should influence halacha, but as I said, there's two stages. You start, first of all, with the halacha that is formulated as halacha, and then you add to it also the environment or the whole circle of being in an ethical behavior. We find it also in the halacha books that many times they say, this is the halacha, but if you want to be better, if you want latzet yedei shamayim, you want to fulfill all your missions towards the divine, you should be also ethical and not only strict or deal with explicit halacha.
So I guess what you're saying is that there is an inherent overarching ethic, and is it our responsibility? Is that every generation's responsibility, or a rabbi's responsibility, individual's responsibility to apply that to the age? Or, you know, one gets a sense, I think also certainly when I was growing up, albeit I was in a fairly Haredi background, there was an idea that our way of life is the way of life, halacha is the structure, and that remains static. And that's our ethical norm. And ethics may change outside, but one of the wonderful things about the Torah is that this is our ethic. And I think what you're saying here is that we need to have some adaptation.
Actually, I disagree with all the assumptions that you said. I mean, I'm not completely disagree, but I think it's a fake. First of all, the halacha changes. And constantly, you can see the first Tosfot in the Talmud, Babylonian Talmud. The first one is asking, even though in early times the reading of Kriyat Shema, reciting Kriyat Shema, is from Tzet HaKochavim, but in London and in Paris and where the Tosfot sages lived, you can't do it. It's 11:30 at night, p.m. to 12 o'clock, and we read earlier. So how come? So halacha is much more dynamic. then people think. I want to emphasize it's not reform, it's not changing the rules, it's not selecting what yes and what not, but it's much more, as I said, it's much more dynamic. That's the first thing. The second thing is, in the same time, also ethical rules are being changed, are being different. I'll give you a very example. You said in the beginning that one of my professions is decision before end of life. When we read things that were written 100 years ago, 50 years ago, the idea of informed consent, the idea of freedom of choice, the idea of autonomy wasn't in the hospital. You did what the doctor thought is the best thing to do, and no one asked the patient. Today in ethics, we don't start any procedure without asking, without explaining, without accepting the informed consent. This is a different rule of ethics. It's not the holiness of life in the first place, but it's also, or maybe the first place is freedom of, or autonomy. So things are changing. Now, the halacha, that's what's really is the main idea of halacha, is when the halacha meet those changes, sometimes they reject it. The halacha rejects it because it's a wrong thing to do. Sometimes we adopt it because it's a good process and something was escalated and something was promoted in the entire world. This is what actually rabbis do. I'm talking about Orthodox rabbi. I'm not talking about other ways or other interpretations. I'm talking about Orthodox rabbis. They do it constantly, all the time. So therefore, as you said in your question, the fact that we have to ask ourselves, does this change in ethics, in the entire world ethics, do we accept it? Do we deny it? Do we reject it? This is part of our work constantly.
And where is that ethical sense being derived from? I mean, you mentioned at the beginning of the conversation of overarching principles, and you quoted from Hillel, I think. But when we're thinking more broadly, some of the examples that you gave, and we'll get into it in a bit more detail. Where are you deriving that sense of ethics from?
As I said before, there are two sources, or even now we can speak about three sources. The first one is interpreting the mitzvah, the order. In many cases, we read it differently during the years, and we emphasize this point and deny this point, and we actually, that's what the oral Torah is doing constantly in the Beis Midrash, reading our old demands and mitzvot and commitments, and are asking ourselves, did we read it correctly? Should we understand it in a different way? And that's the first place. The second place are the prophets. The prophets actually emphasize the idea of the importance of ethical behavior and social justice, and they really emphasize it, and they also said they were very extreme in this point, and they said there's no value to sacrificing or offers in the temple, in the Beis Mikdash, if the layers, the first layers and the pillars are not ethical behavior, and they spoke about specific things. So from there, we can have a lot of sources. The third thing is all kinds of short versions that Chazal, that our sages in the oral Torah, in the Talmud, in the Babylonian Talmud, said about many things, that this is the principle of ethics, and I quoted the most famous one. We have always to ask ourselves that when we say that this is the halacha, is it considered as an ethical behavior under the term of Mashe Sanu Alecha, Al Taseh Lechavecha? So we have a lot of sources that we can ask ourselves. And as you know, we have the tradition of disagreement. So therefore, there are a lot of conversations, a lot of disagreements about that. For instance, in one of the settlements near where I live, there's a big dispute now between the rabbis. If the new synagogue, the building should be accessible completely, or only for I'm talking about disabled and whatever, or because this is an ethical demand, or because of expenses and other reasons, we can do it lower, in a lower level. So this is a disagreement.
Sorry, disabled people, so general access only for the able-bodied, or yeah.
That's right. That's right. So what I'm saying are the sources, but as you know, there's nothing in Jewish life that there is no conversation around it. That's part of our tradition.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes me think also of the, this idea of Nachmanides, of Rambam, when he comments on Kadoshim Tihiyu, you should be holy, what then flows from that.
That's right.
So let's move on, and hopefully we'll come back also to one further contemporary topic at the end. But when we were initially talking in our preparatory conversation for the podcast, you wanted to discuss in particular the ethical challenges of balancing the halachic prohibitions of lashon hara and rechilus, so the prohibitions of slandering, tale-bearing, and generally speaking negatively about others, on the one hand, with the need to speak up to prevent abuse, whistleblowing, etc. On the other hand, why was that something that sprang to mind? Why is that such an important topic?
I must admit that I really think that this is the most important thing, because of two reasons. First of all, the Maimonides writes it in the 7th chapter of Hilchot Deot. He writes that even though there are 3 mitzvahs, Gilui Arayot, Shfichut Damim, Avodah Zarah, that they are the worst sins.
So sorry, just to translate. So it's
okay. Worship, adultery, that's one. Sex inappropriate behavior, or bloodshed. They are the biggest sins that they are. There's something that is above it, and that is talking. Okay, that is. Gossip and gossip is also a problem, but I'm talking about slander and about humiliating people in public and whatever. We have a kind of a level of worst sins. The Rambam says this is the worst, but without the Maimonides, I think that this is the main problem that we have today. Today, with the social media, with everything, with the information that we have, the fact that we can't discuss, that the fact that people can insult and can really dismiss people and to write lies and the worst thing that people can do is a problem, a big problem, maybe the most essential issue when we are talking about being unified, about having a discussion. I said before that our tradition is disagreement, and I love it. I love it. It's part of what I'm doing all day long in the yeshiva. But in the same time, if we cannot handle, if we cannot conduct it with rules of how do you talk, what do you say, how are you ethical in your speaking, then it's not an adventure, and it's not something that it promotes you. It's actually a slippery slope that is damaging everything, dismissing and horrifying everything in our society. So these are the two reasons, in reality, but also in principle, as the Maimonides wrote. But in the same time, we have to remember that if your decision is, because I don't want to make any problems and I don't want to talk in an inappropriate way, I'll be silent and I'll close my mouth, that can be also a terrifying thing, because how will we face and how will we confront evil? How we can save people from other bad people? And it's very interesting that the Torah says in the same pasuk, we read it last week in Parashat Kedoshim that you mentioned before. The first words are Lo telecha chil ba'amecha, so don't be part of slander, of gossip, and you should shut your mouth. But in the same sentence, the continuation is Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa. When I teach my students, I said the first one said shut your mouth. And the second part is open your mouth when you have to rescue people, when you have to defend them, when you have to protect, when you have to confront evil. And the balance between those two issues is the most interesting and important thing. When do you have to shut your mouth? And when being silent is really a bad thing from the ethical point of view.
So if we can unpack that a little, particularly if we're talking about from a halacha perspective, how does one develop a practical framework here? What are the principles to think about? And, often as not, I guess, if one is thinking in maybe an employment in a situation, so that there may be opportunity to try and, to sit back and to think, do I whistleblow, not speak up? There's a big things. But, what you're saying also is if I'm on social media and I want to respond to something, or I want to defend someone, I need to have that sense. How does one develop? Or what is the framework that we can have that we can practically apply?
So there is approximately 100 years ago, the Chafetz Chaim, one of our biggest sages, wrote 7 principles in order that you have to keep them when you are deciding not to, when you think that this is the time to talk. Now, I will not speak about all the 7 now because some of them are also not relevant to social media, but I'll say 4 principles, and very shortly. You have to ask yourself, first of all, what is your motivation? What is your real motivation? Is your real motivation is to destroy someone, to embarrass something, or your real motivation is to fix the world, or to protect or defend someone? This is the first thing. The second question is that you have to ask yourself, is there a necessity? That means if you can do it in a different way without causing damage, speak to the person that is attacking someone, can you find a different way, or is there a necessity? The third principle is it proportional? I mean, the fact that you have to protect someone is very good, but what words are you using? Are you too extreme, or are you manipulating, or are you speaking without emotions and without any exaggerations? You say the truth, and that's a very important thing. And the fourth one is, did you check that you are not, you are opening one door, but maybe you are shutting the other one? I mean, you are actually causing a lot of damage to another thing, even though in this case you are protecting someone. So that's in general. It's not exactly what the Chafetz Chaim said. It's not exactly what he wrote, because, as I said, his 7 principles are not always relevant to what we are talking about. But when you try to analyze them, you see that there are those 4 principles. And I think, and I must admit, I'm working with them. I always ask myself before I write something, if it's, first of all, what is my real motivation? The second one, is there a necessity? Third, proportional. And fourth, be careful not to cause damage, by doing a good thing, one good thing, but harming a lot of things in the other direction.
Are there some practical examples that you could share? The issues which
I'll give you an example. Okay, a very common question that I'm being asked, as you said, I'm answering questions online. I went to a restaurant. They were awful. Okay, they were awful. They were outrageous, and I want to. Should I write something on the website? Should I advertise? Should I do it? Or I don't want to say anything that is related to slander or to gossip or to, and I'll keep silent. Okay. So according to to the principles, my answer I'll say it shortly. It's not, it's probably will be wider, but my answer will be what is your motivation? If your motivation is to protect other people, if your motivation is revenge or vanity or whatever, don't do it. If your motivation is to protect other people, to go to this restaurant because they're really not honest and not professional, okay, that's A. B, is there a necessity? My answer is yes. I think that our commitment to protect innocent people is much more important than to protect the owner of the restaurant because he is not okay. He is not behaving according. Okay. Third, I'll say, but write it in a proportional way. Write exact, be exact, be accurate, not examine. Don't exaggerate. Don't write nasty words. Read. We had this dish. It was too salty. It was this. And when we complained, we got insulted by the waiter or something like this. Okay. Be very, very straight. And the fourth thing is be careful. But if you'll see, for instance, that this restaurant is a new restaurant, okay, and they only started. Maybe I don't know something else. So be careful not to cause damage that you don't have to cause. And I think this is the halacha way. As you say, it's in business. In many cases, the question is when dating. When someone is asking you about as a head of a yeshiva, we always get calls from someone. My daughter is dating with someone in your yeshiva. How is he? Yeah. So you should say the truth. I mean, in order to protect a marriage that will collapse. Or my commitment is to the people, is to the truth. But work according to those principles, and then you'll find your way in a very, very, I think, really righteous way, that you are not silent, that you are not, people are not falling in all kinds of obstacles because of you, but in the same time, you said you didn't injure us, other people, when it's not necessary.
So I guess that's from the perspective of, what you say or what you don't say. There's also a side of, I suppose, what you hear or what you remove yourself from. And I'm thinking, you're in these different committees, governmental level, rabbinical level. There must be many of the conversations you talk for about disagreements, and we all know that in practice sometimes the disagreements are a little uglier than they should be, at least in modern day politics, etc. So part of what we're expected to do is to remove ourselves from conversations where the kind of language or the kind of topic we've been talking about is bound to arise. But if that's going to be necessary in order for you to do your job, in order to know what people are saying, in order to be able to steer other people away, what's the kind?
The truth is that it's much more complicated because we are in a democratic environment. We are voters, so. Right. We as a kind of a judge, we have to know, even if we don't have a position, if we don't have a mission, but we have to know what's going on. Yeah. At the same time, we know that the communication and the social media is very, very polluted. We know it. So it's very interesting. The Gemara deals, I'll say it again very briefly. As you know, after the destruction of the first temple, the authority was Gedaliah, and he was assassinated. He was murdered. And the Gemara blames him for the fact that he was murdered. Why? The Gemara asks. Because they told him that someone is coming to kill him. They told him, and he said, I don't want to hear slander, and therefore he was killed. So the Gemara asks, so what should he have done? I mean, from one hand, from other hand. And I'll give it in a modern translation. The Gemara says, everything you hear, your approach to it, your attitude towards what you hear is as a story, not as the truth. I mean, you have to understand it may be right, it may be not right. So you have to tell yourself, this is what people say about ABC. Now, ask yourself, how can I protect myself from slaughter, from slander, from one hand, and from slaughter in the other hand? For instance, I was one of the founders of what we call Takana Forum. And Takana Forum deals with sex abuse that is not official, the police or the judge, the courts can't deal with it for many of reasons. But as a society, we can have all kinds of trying to understand what happened and trying to fix it, not punishment. We don't have the authority and we don't want to have the authority. It's very interesting things that we are doing from the ethical point of view. And whenever someone comes and says that I was attacked by, or as offended by, or as I was abused by, or whatever, I always tell myself, it may be completely right, it can be wrong. Not what are you doing when your approach towards it, it's still a story. It's a story that can be right, a true story, it can be a kind of manipulation. And when this is your approach, you find your way, because you are looking for other evidence, you are looking for other people, you ask yourself if it's a kind of a pattern of a behavior and whatever, and you are always aware that everything you hear, and that's a recommendation that I have to everyone that is listening now, everything that you hear on the news, on the television, and especially in social media, your first approach should be, it's not facts, it's a story. It's a story that can be true, can be wrong, and you have to work harder in order to prove it or reject this information.
So it's almost as if you're sitting above whatever is being said, whatever is going on, as and when relevant to determine right or wrong. Then that's
you must do it. You must, and definitely today, because I think decades ago there was a ethical code of the communication. At least they pretended, they tried to be objective. Okay, today the different channels are they're on the field. They're playing. They're not only reporting. Okay, they are part of the game. So once someone is part of the game, you can't trust nothing that he says as facts. Okay, and definitely when we're talking about social media, there everyone is a player. Most of the people, I think that the vast majority, maybe everyone there has his interests. So therefore, you cannot. It will be not ethical and a wrong thing to do that when you read something about someone. It's a fact. It's something that someone wrote, and now you have to check, you have to balance, you have to do all kinds of things in order to that your approach or your attitude towards this information can be something that is a fact and not only a murmur, whatever.
It probably depends also on the subject matter. If it's social media and something is being said about an actor or something, how much does that really matter? But if it is, as you say, you're talking about politicians and you have a responsibility to vote,
that's right,
committees, and someone is, or whatever situation that.
And we didn't speak yet about the AI, because what the AI can do is really amazing. It's the AI is the real challenge that we have regarding information, regarding seeing things. Once they said, there's nothing better than a picture. A picture is better than 11,000 articles. Yeah. Today you can't say it anymore. I mean, really. So you have to be very careful, very careful.
But there are times, I guess, if somebody's coming to you, and saying they've been a victim of sexual abuse or something, then maybe even applying the 4 principles that we talked about beforehand, there is a certain responsibility, obviously, in listening, taking it seriously, trying to understand, the motivations to help correct the situation, like you were
absolutely
saying.
It's an ethical demand and it's a mitzvah. You cannot say it's not my business and I don't want to get involved in it. It's really an ethical commitment.
Thank you. Maybe pivoting a little and in a way going back to areas which we were touching on beforehand, and halacha in a particular environment or as it develops. In a recent book, Rav Yuval, you've discussed that as a Jewish nation, that we need to demonstrate a superior morality in our conduct of war now than the global consensus and the norms of a current situation. So we need to be assessing, looking, and then trying to be acting above what is the norm. Could you expand on that, please?
I'll start first of all with our main obstacle, I'll call it, and that is the fact that we don't have a tradition of laws regarding war crime or what are you permitted to do during war or not. Unfortunately, we didn't have an independent state for who knows how many years, 2,500 years. So therefore, the sages didn't deal with those issues. The only sources that we have is from the Tanakh, from the Bible. And in those days, everything was permitted. Actually, we don't find even one boundary, something that is inappropriate towards human being. Towards trees, yes, but towards human being, we don't have anything. And the wars during Tanakh time were very cruel. So what can be our sources in order to deal with those issues? My answer is, even during Tanakh time, we did have moral commitments. For instance, the mitzvah of how to act towards a eshet that was much more moral, a captive woman that you wanted to take her into that she'll be your wife. That was very common in the old world, and then everyone could rape and could do everything, but the Halacha says and the Torah says we have to be 2 steps ahead. And there are those kind of sources that prove that even in those old days where there were almost no boundaries and no limitation of what to do during war, we were 2 steps ahead. My claim in the book is, okay, we should do the same thing also now, okay? And we have, first of all, the first mission that we have is to protect ourselves, defend the state of Israel, defend the Jews all over the world. This is the first, that's the priority. But saying that, we have to ask ourselves, how can we do it with the most ethical and most moral, with the less bloodshed or less other things, even less harm to the environment, because the Halacha says, as I said before, that we have to consider also the trees. Now, I want to emphasize, we have a priority, and that is to protect and to defend and to save our lives and the Jews all over the world. But after saying that, exactly like in Tanakh time, that we were 2 steps ahead, also now we have to be 2 steps ahead and be very, very careful not to do things that are not appropriate from the ethical point of view during war.
And obviously it's that gray line between what is considered to be self-defense.
That's right.
And on the other hand, is what is over and above that, and how
that's right. But from my experience, from my experience, and it's not only as a commander in the IDF, but I was also an ethical advisor for a few units, and 7 of my boys and girls served in the army. I mean, from my experience, I can say one thing: you don't have a answer to every situation, okay? And it's really you can't be accurate, and if you want to give in advance all kinds of instruction and restrictions or whatever, you can't do it, because every minute in the battlefield something happens and it's different from the other place, whatever. But once you are used only to ask yourself, when you feel that you want to fulfill those 2 missions, protect or defend the state of Israel and your friends or whatever, and do it in the most ethical way that you can, when it's in your mind, your decisions are being influenced by those 2 principles. And that's the most important thing. That's what I wrote. I didn't write what we should do or what we shouldn't do, because there's millions of circumstances, and every time it's different. And everyone that was in the battlefield can understand that, and you don't have time, and you don't have the debate and whatever. You can't do it. But once this is part of your personality, part of your character, part of your dreams, I want to fulfill the mission of a soldier and do it in the most ethical way that I can, you behave different.
And as we're thinking about these ethical norms, which then may change generation to generation, as we've touched on a couple of times now, are we thinking, how much are we, I guess, taking into consideration the way that we're being viewed by others? So some of the others who we may be looking to in terms of defining what's an ethical standard of the age, and how much are we just trying rather to adhere to what we understand within the society, within the world, has become a developed ethical norm. So I guess part of that question is, to what extent are we taking into consideration what other people think of us?
First of all, we do take in consideration, because we are part of humanity and we're part of the entire world. But above that, don't forget that there is a mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem, of glorifying our God. And when Judaism will be related or will be defined as a crucial or as a failure of ethical behavior, that's Chilul Hashem. That's part of our lives and part of our missions in the world. So that we must take in consideration. But first of all, as I said, there are principles. First of all, we have to fulfill our mission to protect ourselves. And the second thing is, be very careful by taking in consideration, because there's a lot of hypocrisy. When people attack someone else that he's not ethical, but when it reach their life, they are in a completely different behavior. Hypocrisy and anti-Semitism. We have to be very careful to take in consideration. But I think that this is part of our mission. Part of our mission in the world is to make this world a better world, to glorify our Ribono Shel Olam, our God. And this is something that we must do. And again, we have sources in our tradition that those considerations were being done. For instance, to Hashavat Avedah, to return someone things that a Gentile lost, is part of our important behavior, in order that they'll see the morality and the way that we behave. And there are even sources of doing much more extreme things in order not to cause Chilul Hashem, not to cause something that will violate the glorification of Hashem. It's part of our consideration, but I want to emphasize part, and not the entire thing. We have to balance between all kinds of aspects, the importance, the morality, the Kiddush Hashem, and as I said, also being careful from hypocrisy and being careful from anti-Semitism.
Thank you. This has been a wonderful discussion. Thank you very much. Lots of ethical issues which you have raised and to think about, both, I guess, to an extent on the academic front, but then very much also how it's applied today in a number of different circumstances. Thank you so much, Rav Yuval, for taking the time today, and we hope to see you again.
And thank you for dealing with these such important issues. Really, I have a lot of I'm proud to be part of you and dealing with the most important things. Don't forget that our identification card that was said to Avraham Avinu, to Abraham, V'shamru derech Hashem la'asot tzedakah u'mishpat. That this is our identification card, and you are making your contribution to this process and those values.
Thank you. Thank you very
Okay?
much. Thank you.
Goodbye from Israel. Shalom, shalom.